So it is mid-April 2026.
Yeah.
And the digital landscape of Latin America is just completely on fire right now.
Oh, yeah. It is an absolute mess.
I mean, hackers are not just stealing silent or invisible files anymore. They've actually hijacked the security cameras of major corporate lobbies across Mexico.
Just terrifying.
And they're broadcasting these live video feeds of completely unsuspecting employees directly to the dark web. So the whole traditional playbook of corporate denial is just dead.
It is entirely gone. I mean, we are witnessing a definitive paradigm shift right now.
Right.
The barrier between digital vulnerabilities and profound physical world consequences has essentially evaporated.
Exactly.
What we're looking at is no longer just a crisis of data privacy. It is a crisis of physical security and energy sovereignty and, honestly, national stability.
So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to dissect this massive and highly ironic data breach involving a prominent Mexican cybersecurity firm called BePrime.
Yes. Highly ironic is definitely the right phrase there.
And we are going to use this specific cascading incident as sort of a magnifying glass to understand the incredibly fragile digital architecture underlying Latin America right now.
Because it is fragile. Very fragile.
And the stack of sources we have for this is just dense. We are analyzing breaking threat intelligence alerts pulled straight off X, which is formerly Twitter, from firms like vCert and Brinstech.
Right.
We also have these incredibly detailed technical breakdowns from independent cybersecurity experts, people like Alberto Daniel Hill and Ignacio Gomez Villaseñor.
Their analysis has been crucial to making sense of all this.
Yeah, it really has. And tying the whole narrative together, we are relying on a very comprehensive geopolitical forensic PDF report that maps out the systemic risks exposed by this hack. So we are just trying to convey what all these different sources are telling us.
And you know what the sources paint is a picture of an ecosystem where trust is actually the primary vector of attack.
Oh, for sure.
We are looking at a scenario where the very entities hired to build the digital fortresses are the ones leaving the gates wide open.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, I mean, if you're analyzing this from the outside, it is really easy to assume this is localized, like just a Mexican corporate issue.
Which a lot of people probably thought at first.
Right. But the mechanics of this breach dictate how modern supply chain infrastructure operates globally. It is about how the third-party services holding your personal data or managing your local energy grids are tethered to these single points of failure.
And that is why everyone listening needs to care about this.
Exactly. If you rely on digital infrastructure for your day-to-day existence, then the architecture of this breach directly impacts your threat model.
So we need to start with the timeline and the explicit facts of the exfiltration. Just understand the massive scope of this thing.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
So on April 15th, 2026, a threat actor operating under the handle dylanmarly dumped a payload of 10 to 12.6 gigabytes of data onto a well-known cybercrime forum.
And the target was BePrime.
Exactly. BePrime was the target.
And BePrime is not some peripheral IT vendor. I mean, they're based in Monterey, founded around 2019, and their entire market positioning is built on digital transformation and cloud architecture.
High-level cybersecurity, that is their whole brand.
Right. They are the guards hired by the absolute titans of manufacturing, retail, and energy to harden their networks. So when a multi-billion-dollar enterprise needs to ensure they are not the next ransomware headline, they integrate BePrime into their deepest operational layers.
Which means their access was comprehensive. They were inside everything.
Yeah.
And the mechanism of the attack, the initial access vector, is just staggering in its negligence.
It really is.
I mean, the threat actor explicitly stated in their forum post that they compromised BePrime's infrastructure simply because the firm's administrative accounts lacked basic two-factor authentication.
Wait, so no MFA at all?
No MFA.
I mean, for a premier cybersecurity provider to operate enterprise-level admin accounts in 2026 without MFA is not just an oversight. That is systemic operational malpractice.
It breaks every baseline protocol of zero-trust architecture. You just do not leave single-factor credentials guarding the keys to a kingdom of enterprise clients.
It is honestly like hiring a top-tier security firm to guard your house, and then you find out they leave the master keys to the entire neighborhood under a plastic rock by their front door.
That is a perfect analogy. And the phrase keys to the kingdom is technically literal here.
How so?
Because the core concept here is this supply chain attack. BePrime was not just hosting their own corporate data. They were hosting Cisco Meraki API keys.
Okay, so explain what that means for the listener.
Well, by harvesting those API keys, the threat actor could completely bypass BePrime's internal network. They gained direct programmatic access to the environments of BePrime's clients.
Wow, so they didn't even have to hack the clients directly.
Exactly. The sources highlight that compromised Cisco Meraki API keys effectively act as a silent skeleton key. They bypass human authentication entirely.
So you were not hacking a login portal, you were just executing commands directly against the underlying infrastructure.
Right. And the data shows this gave the hacker total control over 1,858 network devices.
Which is a massive footprint.
It is huge. Switches, routers, firewalls. And through that control, they possessed access to the traffic of over 2,600 connected devices.
Which means the lateral movement potential is astronomical.
Exactly. They compromised the supplier to instantly establish persistence inside the targets. And the exfiltrated data proves the depth of this access.
What exactly was in the dump?
We are looking at plaintext credentials, customer relationship management data pulled directly via Salesforce integrations, and exposed S3 buckets.
And who knows what proprietary cloud data was in those buckets.
Right. Plus Docker and PostgreSQL configurations.
But the absolute crown jewels in this dump, like the files that turn this from a severe breach into a catastrophic corporate liability, are the penetration testing reports.
Oh, yeah. The pen test reports are, without a doubt, the most damaging element of that 12.6 gigabytes.
I mean, when companies like Alsea, which runs the infrastructure for Starbucks and Domino's across Mexico, hire a firm like BePrime, they are paying them to ethically hack their networks.
Right. To find the holes before the bad guys do.
Exactly. Or the food conglomerate BFAR, or the industrial glass manufacturer Vitro. BePrime maps every vulnerability, every unpatched server, and every misconfigured firewall rule for these massive companies.
So the hacker did not just breach these massive corporations, they stole the literal step-by-step blueprints on how to compromise them further.
As an index catalog of vulnerabilities for the largest industrial players in the region.
And the threat actor, dylanmarly, made their motives explicitly clear on the forum.
Yeah, they really didn't hide their intent.
No, they did not. They stated they published this data specifically so the clients of BePrime would realize their proprietary data was fundamentally insecure.
So it was a calculated public humiliation of a security provider.
Exactly. It was an ideological flex as much as it was a data dump. But what elevates this incident into uncharted territory is the nature of the evidence provided.
Because it wasn't just text files.
Right. The threat actor did not just upload a text file of hashes or directory listing and expect the intelligence community to blindly verify it. They provided visceral visual proof.
The images circulating on X right now, which are watermarked by the independent researcher Ignacio Gomez Villaseñor, completely bypass the abstract nature of a typical data breach.
They make it real for the average person.
Exactly. We are not looking at lines of code. We're looking at live feeds from physical security cameras inside these corporate environments.
The hacker infiltrated the Cisco Meraki dashboard, which was labeled NOC-CAM, and pulled live video from a location identified as Live Aqua Monterey.
Which is just wild to think about. You see employees sitting at their monitors utterly oblivious to the fact that their operational security has been inverted and they are being broadcast to threat actors globally.
And the sources detail multiple feeds, too. There was one labeled Lobby Cam and another called Engineeria Cam.
So they had real-time operational visibility into the engineering departments?
Yes. And this ties into a critical conceptual framework introduced in the geopolitical forensic report we are analyzing today. The author calls it the epistemology of the screenshot.
I love this concept. It is fascinating.
What is fascinating here is that in the modern theater of cyber warfare, a screenshot of an admin dashboard or a live camera feed operates as a digital proof of life.
Right. It fundamentally breaks traditional corporate incident response.
Because historically, when a breach occurs, the immediate reflex of a corporate PR department is containment through opacity.
Yeah, they try to minimize the scope and issue some sterile press release calling it a brief service degradation or a contained IT anomaly.
Exactly. They rely on the fact that shareholders and the public lack the technical literacy to read forensic server logs. Opacity is their primary defensive shield.
But the epistemology of the screenshot forces undeniable transparency.
You cannot argue with a photo. An inalterable image of a proprietary internal dashboard or a live view of an engineering floor instantly communicates catastrophic security failure to anyone, regardless of their technical background.
It completely strips the corporation of its ability to control the narrative. I mean, you cannot PR your way out of a live video feed of your own office being broadcast to a dark web forum.
You really can't.
But wait, I have to push back on the inherent value of this visual proof, though.
Okay, how so?
Because if we, as an intelligence community or as a society, become conditioned to only react to a breach when there is visceral cinematic evidence like a camera feed. We create a massive blind spot.
I see where you're going with
I
this.
mean, the most devastating data exfiltrations are completely silent and invisible. If a state-sponsored APT quietly siphons 10 million encrypted healthcare records or proprietary source code over 6 months, there is no flashy screenshot to go viral on X.
That is a very valid point.
So do we risk letting corporations off the hook for massive structural failures simply because the stolen data isn't photogenic?
The visual bias in threat perception is absolutely a legitimate systemic risk, and the forensic report acknowledges that. It notes that the visceral nature of the screenshot creates immediate urgency, which can easily skew resource allocation and public outrage away from less visible but highly critical database compromises.
It is the shiny object syndrome, basically.
Right. However, within the specific ecosystem of this Latin American crisis, the report argues that this forced transparency is serving a vital democratizing function.
Okay, how does it do that?
It shifts the arbitration of truth away from corporate media teams and directly into the hands of independent intelligence analysts.
The timeline of the disclosure perfectly illustrates that power shift, actually.
Let's look at the timeline.
So the initial payload hit the forum at 21.44 GMT on April 15th, and the mainstream media, like Reuters, El País, the major Mexican syndicates, they were entirely silent.
They either lacked the capability to analyze the dark web dump, or they were just waiting for official sanitized corporate statements.
Probably a bit of both. But by 12.02 GMT, the very next day, Vessert had already posted a public alert on X.
They moved incredibly fast.
Yeah, and Alberto Daniel Hill had published a comprehensive technical breakdown. The independent community forced the issue into the public square before the PR machinery could bury it.
The independent researchers weaponized the screenshot to demand accountability. They verified the API keys, they confirmed the camera feeds, and they established the ground truth.
It is just a stark example of decentralized forensic journalism operating faster and more effectively than legacy institutional reporting.
And that forced transparency in Mexico stands in stark contrast to how other countries handle similar crises.
Oh, absolutely. Which leads to a tale of two different approaches to a digital emergency. Because while Mexico is experiencing this explosive forced transparency driven by independent researchers on social media, the geopolitical forensic report details a concurrent crisis further south where an institution attempted the exact opposite approach.
Right, we need to look at Uruguay.
Tell us about the Uruguay situation.
Pulling from the PDF source, there is a concurrent crisis in Uruguay involving the Banco Hipotecario del Uruguay, or BHU, and the GRI educational platform.
And this provides a perfect control case for how institutions handle catastrophic digital extortion.
Exactly. So the sources indicate that a threat group known as Crypto24 exfiltrated 700 gigabytes of sensitive data.
700 gigs is a massive amount of banking and educational data.
It is huge. And unlike the BePrime incident, where the public was instantly aware of the scope, BHU instituted what the report formally labels a protocol of silence.
A protocol of silence.
Yes. The institution's response to the extortion demand was not public disclosure. It was to initiate a complete hard shutdown of their entire system.
Wait, they just pulled the plug on everything.
They pulled the emergency switch, a total network shutdown.
I mean, a total network shutdown is rarely a calculated defensive maneuver. It is almost always a symptom of profound architectural failure.
Exactly. If an enterprise's only mechanism to halt an act of intrusion is to sever power to the entire infrastructure, it is a glaring admission that their network topology lacks basic segmentation.
Right, you were talking about lateral movement. In a mature segmented environment, if an attacker breaches an external-facing web server, you isolate that specific node.
You do not take down the central banking core.
Exactly. So when BHU hit that emergency switch, it wasn't a proactive defense. It was a desperate attempt to sever the pathways because their internal network was entirely flat. The hackers had unchecked lateral mobility.
And the emergency switch confirms they were moving freely across internal trust boundaries. But the sociological impact of the protocol of silence is really what the forensic report focuses on.
Why is that so damaging?
Well, when a national institution goes dark and refuses to disclose the magnitude of the exfiltration, they are prioritizing institutional reputation over citizen security.
Here is where it gets really interesting for anyone listening. Think about this. If your bank was hacked, would you rather they shut everything off and stay quiet, or have a rogue journalist Post screenshots of the hacker's dashboard on Twitter so you know the truth immediately.
Most people would want to know because the opacity is actively hostile to the end user.
It really is. If a national bank loses 700 gigabytes of data and issues a vague statement about technical maintenance, the citizens whose financial and personal data are inside that payload are stripped of their agency.
They do not know if they need to rotate credentials, monitor for identity theft, or freeze their credit lines.
The state protects its image while the citizen absorbs the invisible risk.
And the forensic report is unequivocal in its condemnation of the protocol of silence. It argues that opacity in face of a breach is a secondary betrayal of trust.
Which makes total sense.
The forced transparency we saw in Mexico, as chaotic and damaging as it was to BePrime's reputation, allowed downstream clients and individuals to immediately initiate defensive measures.
It is a brutal calculus, but the evidence strongly suggests that ugly public transparency is functionally superior to managed institutional silence.
Every time.
But the stakes in Mexico are substantially higher than just consumer banking data. The BePrime breach exposed something that keeps entire nations running, the physical energy grid.
Right. We are transitioning from data privacy to kinetic physical risk.
Explain the connection there.
Well, when we analyze BePrime's compromised client roster, we are looking at the foundational pillars of the Mexican economy.
Like who specifically?
Well, Iberdrola operates vast segments of the energy sector. ArcelorMittal is a global titan in steel production, and Whirlpool represents massive industrial manufacturing.
And to contextualize this threat for the listener, the sources detail the current regulatory and political environment in Mexico.
And we are reporting this neutrally based on the geopolitical facts in the text.
Right. Under President Sheinbaum's administration in Mexico, there's a sweeping mandate for energy sovereignty. And this heavily relies on new regulations, like the grid code.
And this grid code legally mandates the integration of battery energy storage systems, or BAS, for all new solar and wind power plants.
So they're forcing the adoption of these massive battery systems.
Yes, the market for BAS in Mexico is scaling exponentially. The critical factor is that these battery storage systems are not simply passive chemical reserves.
What are
They are highly complex, digitally networked industrial control systems. They require constant high-frequency data exchanges to balance grid loads and manage frequency regulation.
basically to integrate intermittent renewable sources like wind and solar into the baseline power supply.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really fascinating technological adoption framework that the forensic report highlights, which is called the S-curve.
Right, the S-curve. And this isn't just an abstract economics theory. It perfectly maps the vulnerability apex these corporations are currently traversing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the S-curve visualizes the life cycle of technological integration.
Okay, break that down.
At the genesis of the curve, you have emerging technologies like grid-scale BES. They represent high innovation, but they suffer from severe maturity deficits regarding cybersecurity standards.
Because the industrial protocols managing these batteries were often designed for efficiency and interoperability, not for defending against advanced persistent threats.
Right. They certainly were not built to defend against hackers navigating through compromised third-party API keys.
So the vulnerability apex is actually the integration phase, which is the steep middle of the S-curve.
Exactly. And the source points specifically to ArcelorMittal as an example.
The steel producer.
Yes. As the second largest steel producer globally, they are undergoing a multi-billion-dollar decarbonization initiative.
Which means ripping out legacy air-gapped mechanical systems and replacing them with hyperconnected, cloud-monitored IoT sensors.
To track carbon emissions and optimize energy use, they are forcibly integrating 50-year-old heavy industry with the modern hostile internet.
And that bridging of the legacy mechanical world with the modern digital world is exactly where vendors like BePrime operate.
That is the crucial link. The enterprise expands its attack surface exponentially to achieve efficiency and compliance, and they rely on third-party IT management to secure the perimeter.
But if that third party fails, the attack vectors bypass the enterprise's internal defenses completely.
Which is exactly what happened here, and the forensic report points out a massive contradiction in corporate ESG goals.
Right, ESG being environmental, social, and governance mandates.
Yes, global markets and regulators force these corporations into radical transparency regarding their environmental footprint. An enterprise like ArcelorMittal must publicly report every metric of their carbon reduction to secure investment.
But the exact same regulatory frameworks allow total opacity regarding their cybersecurity posture.
It is a massive contradiction. You cannot achieve sustainable green energy or meaningful ESG goals if the underlying infrastructure can be weaponized or disabled via a compromised API key.
Yeah, I mean, if a threat actor can penetrate the IT network, pivot to the operational technology network, and shut down the digital controllers managing a wind farm's battery storage, the environmental value of that infrastructure is instantly zero.
Cybersecurity is the unacknowledged prerequisite for environmental sustainability.
It is like building a state-of-the-art smart home with solar panels and automated locks, but relying on a neighborhood kid with a master key to manage it all.
That is exactly what it is like.
If he loses the key, your whole smart house turns against you.
And the reality detailed in the sources is that these massive high-tech vulnerabilities aren't just exploited by anonymous hackers in dark rooms.
Right. They are connected to violent physical realities on the ground.
The digital threat landscape in Latin America is inextricably linked to physical organized crime.
Which brings us to the intersection of cyber extortion and cartel operations. The intelligence reports really focus on this.
Because cybercrime requires extensive physical infrastructure.
We can examine the events of April 1st, 2026, which was roughly 2 weeks before the BePrime leak, to understand the scale. The Mexican government executed what they called Operation Disconnection.
Operation Disconnect.
Yes. And neutrally reporting the facts from the source, the metrics of Operation Disconnection read like a military campaign. The authorities arrested 102 individuals and seized 192 properties across 7 municipalities in the state of Mexico.
And the target was not narcotics.
No, these decentralized networks of digital extortion and fraud.
Specifically, the operation targeted the infrastructure supporting Gota digital loans.
Explain Gota for us.
They are predatory, high-interest microloans distributed via mobile apps. When a user downloads the app, they unknowingly grant access to their contacts, photos, and location data.
And then the extortion begins when the debt inevitably spirals.
Right. The networks utilize call centers to wage psychological warfare, threatening the victim's family and colleagues using the exfiltrated data.
And the physical requirements for this level of digital extortion are massive. You don't run a multi-million-dollar Gota operation from a single laptop in a basement.
You need vast call centers, servers, physical safe houses, and complex financial networks to launder the cryptocurrency payments back into fiat currency.
Which leads to the most alarming aspect of Operation Disconnection that the forensic report points out: the intersection of this cyber-physical infrastructure with local political corruption.
And again, adhering strictly to the geopolitical facts presented in the sources, the sweep resulted in the arrests of several political figures.
Most notably, the mayor of Amalco.
Yes. And the implication the report draws from this is that local municipal structures are being co-opted to shield the physical infrastructure of cybercrime.
I mean, a cartel cannot operate a 200-person extortion call center without the complicity or coercion of local authorities. It is physically impossible.
It is. The analytical conclusion here is definitive. The security of digital databases is fundamentally dependent on the physical security of the state.
If organized crime can infiltrate municipal governments to protect the servers and call centers, then purely digital defensive measures like firewalls are insufficient.
The physical and digital threat models have entirely merged.
So what does this all mean? Which introduces the most permanent and chilling vulnerability discussed in this entire stack of intelligence.
Because when we talk about BePrime losing passwords or API keys, the remediation is incredibly costly, but it is possible.
Right, you revoke the keys, you audit the logs, you force a global password reset, the damage is temporal.
But the sources detail a looming crisis in Mexico regarding data that cannot be reset.
We're talking about the biometric vacuum.
Yes. The independent journalist Ignacio Gomez Villaseñor has published severe warnings regarding the aggressive push to centralize biometric data collection across Mexico.
We are dealing with fingerprints, facial recognition hashes, and iris scans.
And the geopolitical context provided by the sources, again reporting impartially on the legislative landscape, is that Mexico is currently operating without a comprehensive federal cybersecurity law.
Simultaneously, there are intense political debates regarding the potential dissolution of the INAI,
which is the National Data Protection and Transparency Agency.
Right. Concurrently, parliamentary groups like the PAN have been proposing strict limitations on the collection and deployment of biometric data.
And the lack of a cohesive, enforceable legal framework, combined with the push for biometric centralization, creates an unprecedented systemic risk.
Villaseñor's analysis notes that criminal organizations have already demonstrated the capability and intent to monetize personal data leaked from federal institutions.
He cites previous compromises involving the INE, the National Electoral Institute.
So the permanence of biometrics completely alters the risk calculus.
Because if the state centralizes fingerprint and iris data without mathematically rigorous, legally mandated encryption, they're constructing a centralized target.
Especially without a dedicated oversight body like the INAI to audit those defenses.
Exactly. They're building a target for organizations that have already proven they can compromise top-tier cybersecurity firms like BePrime.
And the permanence is the scary part. If a password is stolen in a BePrime-style hack, you change it. If your API key is stolen, you generate a new one.
But if the cryptographic hash of your fingerprint is stolen and cracked, your foundational identity is compromised indefinitely. You cannot reissue a biometric signature.
It is gone forever.
To mathematically quantify the severity of these modern data breaches, the author of the Forensic Report introduces a novel risk assessment model.
I found this part really interesting, the L sub I formula.
Right, the L sub I formula. It is an attempt to move beyond obsolete volume-based threat metrics.
Explain simply for the audio format why volume-based metrics are obsolete.
Well, for the last 20 years, the industry has defined the severity of a data breach almost exclusively by volume. We see headlines like 10 million user records stolen.
Which conditions us to believe that sheer size equals systemic danger.
But the L sub I formula, which calculates the loss of integrity, argues that volume is increasingly irrelevant in highly networked industrial environments.
So what are the variables in the formula?
The formula posits that loss of integrity equals the volume of exfiltrated data multiplied by the criticality of the compromised sector, multiplied by the exposure factor.
So volume is only 1/3 of the equation.
Yes. Let's apply this directly to the BePrime payload. If we rely on legacy metrics, a 12.6 gigabyte leak seems mathematically insignificant.
Right, I mean, we carry smartphones with 20 times that capacity. The volume variable in the formula is remarkably low.
But the formula demands we multiply that low volume by the criticality variable.
And BePrime's clients aren't social media platforms. They are the operators of the national energy grid, global steel supply chains, and massive industrial logistics networks.
So the criticality multiplier is near absolute maximum,
And then you multiply that result by the exposure factor.
which measures the weaponization potential of the data. The hacker did not steal inert historical emails. They stole active Cisco Meraki API keys, providing total network dominance over thousands of devices.
Alongside the highly sensitive pentest reports that act as literal treasure maps to further compromise those critical industries.
The exposure factor amplifies the risk exponentially. So when you calculate a tiny volume multiplied by extreme criticality multiplied by maximum exposure, the resulting loss of integrity is catastrophic.
The mathematical model proves that in a hyper-connected industrial environment, a microscopic payload like an API key can trigger a systemic collapse that vastly outweighs a massive dump of consumer passwords.
It redefines how we have to look at threat intelligence.
It really does. We've traced this from a single failure to implement multi-factor authentication, up through the epistemology of the screenshot, into the systemic vulnerabilities of the green energy S-curve.
And down into the physical realities of political corruption and the permanence of biometric theft.
It is a deeply interconnected, highly fragile architecture. So I am taking a breath here because the implications of this are heavy.
Very heavy.
Distill all this into actionable solutions for us, based on the source material.
Well, the forensic report does not merely diagnose the pathology. It prescribes a specific 5-pillar framework for establishing resilience within this ecosystem.
Let's debate these pillars quickly because prescribing solutions is easier than executing them in this geopolitical reality. What is Pillar 1?
Pillar 1 calls for mandatory continuous audits of third-party vendors like BePrime. The logic is that an enterprise is only as secure as the weakest vendor in its supply chain.
And the BePrime incident validates this entirely. Enterprises must move beyond compliance checklists and implement continuous programmatic verification of vendor API management.
But wait, I know you were going to challenge the practical application of this.
Oh, absolutely. Who audits the auditors? BePrime was the trusted cybersecurity vendor. They were the ones hired to conduct the audits and pentests for these massive corporations.
That is the paradox.
If the entity you hired to secure your perimeter is operating without MFA, continuous auditing just becomes an Ouroboros of misplaced trust. It requires a fundamental shift to zero-trust architecture, assuming every vendor is already compromised.
That is a necessary evolution in network topology. Pillar 2 shifts from corporate policy to state policy, demanding the implementation of comprehensive federal cybersecurity legislation.
What does the report argue there?
It argues that resilience cannot rely on corporate goodwill. There must be stringent, legally enforceable standards for data encryption, incident reporting, and specifically the handling of biometric data.
Again, though, the legislative solution faces severe friction when you consider the physical reality we discussed regarding Operation Disconnection.
Because of the local corruption.
Right. Federal legislation is a paper shield if the municipal ground reality involves organized crime co-opting local political structures.
It is true.
You can pass the most rigorous cybersecurity laws in the hemisphere, but if cartel-backed call centers operate with impunity due to local corruption, the enforcement mechanism is broken at the root.
The legislative framework must be coupled with physical state security. Pillar 3 directly addresses the cultural response to breaches, which is the absolute abandonment of the protocol of silence.
Right. Transparency must be mandated. We discussed this extensively with the Uruguay BHU example.
Embracing the ugly truth of a breach rather than utilizing the emergency switch and maintaining opacity. Transparency allows the ecosystem to react and defend itself.
Okay, what is Pillar 4?
Pillar 4 focuses on the physical intersection. Massive prioritized investment in defending industrial control systems, or ICS.
Right, as nations traverse the S-curve, installing complex battery energy storage systems and digitizing legacy infrastructure, the cybersecurity protocols must scale alongside the physical rollout.
Energy sovereignty is functionally impossible without dominant cyber defense.
And the final pillar, Pillar 5.
It revolves around the protection of forensic independent journalism.
Which is so crucial here.
The geopolitical report explicitly notes the vital function of independent intelligence analysts and platforms, citing entities like the Infodemia platform in verifying breaches.
Because in environments where state apparatuses or corporate PR teams attempt to manage public perception by labeling damaging data as false, the independent researchers analyzing the server logs are the final mechanism for accountability.
Protecting their ability to operate is a core component of national resilience.
Which actually brings me to a final provocative thought to leave you with today. A vector that builds on everything we have analyzed, but pushes the threat model into the immediate future.
Okay, I am listening.
Think about this. This entire deep dive, the public unmasking of the BePrime supply chain attack, the democratization of the threat intelligence, it all hinged entirely on the epistemology of the screenshot.
The visual proof.
Exactly. The fundamental premise that seeing a live camera feed of a corporate lobby or an image of an internal Cisco Meraki dashboard represents undeniable, inalterable proof.
It is the visual truth that forces the corporate PR machinery to collapse.
Seeing is believing. But we are currently standing on the threshold of an era dominated by flawless real-time AI deepfakes.
Oh, wow.
We are entering an environment where generative models can synthesize hyper-realistic video feeds, hallucinate complex administrative dashboards, and generate coherent, fraudulent server logs in milliseconds.
That is a terrifying thought.
If the screenshot and the live video feed can be artificially generated by any threat actor with a laptop tomorrow, how will independent researchers ever definitively prove that a hack actually occurred?
The epistemology of the screenshot dies when the image can no longer be trusted.
And perhaps even more destabilizing, if a threat actor dumps a completely fabricated AI-generated leak of an enterprise's internal systems, how will that corporation ever definitively prove to the public and the markets that the visual evidence isn't real?
When seeing is no longer believing, the architecture of accountability we rely on completely disintegrates.
It is the existential question facing the intelligence community. When the visual proof of life can be perfectly synthesized, the entire ecosystem of trust and verification will require a fundamental redesign.
Something to carefully consider as you audit your own threat surface.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We will be back to dissect the next vulnerability soon.